Awesome. Okay, we're gonna get started here, guys. So my name is Ives. I'm sorry, I lost my voice a little bit. I'm a sophomore here, economics major, pursuing Russian minor. I'm also working towards the finance and banking certificate with the Jesuit Business Center. This is my first year on the Women in Business Committee, and I'm super excited for being a co-chair, planning the conference. It's been a great experience. I'm super excited that you guys all are here and everyone on Zoom. Great, we could do a hybrid option for everyone. Thank you so much for coming and supporting Women in Business. So I'm excited to get this session started. I'm gonna introduce our panelists now. So at this time, I'd like to welcome you to the Mindful Leadership session. And our speaker is Jackie Mountford, class of 2001. She is an experienced leader and designer and delivers high quality learning experiences and currently serves as a senior director in KPMG Learning and Development. At KPMG, Jackie is responsible for learning strategy, focused on business process group, and she's professional development, targeting leadership, business and technical competencies, as well as firm-wide and required learning, spanning across advisory, tax, and audit client-facing professionals. So now I'll turn the floor over to her. Yeah.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Sydney. Really happy to be here. I was saying earlier that the opportunity to be here in person with you, as well as all the folks that are online, is really exciting. I actually haven't been on campus in about 9 years. In addition to me going to Holy Cross, my 2 younger brothers also went to Holy Cross, as did their wives. And I was last year for a wedding in 2012. So it's really exciting to be here, get to talk about mindful leadership. I'm really excited to just share some of my thoughts about this topic. A lot of how I've positioned this session is really about being a practitioner. So for me, it's all about just lessons I've learned during my career over 19 years in being in the business world, as well as, things that I've really learned along the way as a leader. And so as I started to prepare for this presentation, I tried to think back to those first few moments that were really pivotal for me as a leader. And it took me back to about 7 years or so ago when I had just started a new job, and I had taken a position at an organization to work under a professor that I had actually studied under when I was in graduate school at the Teachers College at Columbia. And I was excited about the opportunity to learn and grow under this former professor as my boss. I had just had my second child. So, I was kind of at this transitionary point where I was just trying to figure out where I wanted to grow from this point forward in my career. And I started the position about 3 months into working there. I had gone on a lunch break and, just went to run a couple errands and then came back to my office, noticed that my boss's door was closed, but I didn't really think much of it. I was like, okay, went and sat down in my office, started to do some work. And shortly after, the vice president of human resources came into my office and started to talk to me. And he was kind of babbling a little bit and was saying things about just how they valued me and everything was going to be okay. And I think pretty quickly he realized I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he quickly realized that and said to me that my boss was let go. So while I was on my lunch break, my boss, who I joined this organization to learn from and, this new opportunity that I thought was the perfect job with the perfect boss and really was going to help me grow in my career, in a moment's notice, everything kind of came crashing down. And all the reasons why I was there, all of a sudden I was in complete shock that this person was no longer here. And I now had to figure out what to do from that point forward. So, after kind of processing some of my own feelings and emotions in that instant, I immediately started to think about the team. So, like myself, there were a few other team members in the office that were located where we were all working. And I immediately went to go check on them to see how they were doing. And, they, of course, were very upset. Some were, even crying. And so instantly I just kind of put my own feelings aside and said, you know what, let's go for a walk. Let's just go outside, walk around the building a little bit. And so we did that. We, took a break and just walked and talked. And after a couple of rounds around the building, they started to just feel better. We all felt better, just kind of taking that moment to breathe and just step away from everything that had happened and just process our emotions. And that opportunity, I think it taught me that moment, and then that opportunity that came from that experience taught me a lot of things. One key one was the best laid plans, can often be turned upside down really quickly in an instant. And it also taught me, I think at that stage of my career, I was in my early 30s. I was still kind of doubting if I was ready to be a leader. I know we heard earlier from our guest speaker just around, our keynote speaker around imposter syndrome and questioning yourself as a woman and as a leader in business. And I didn't know if I was ready to be a leader at that point. I had kind of questioned that. And through that opportunity and actually having that boss that I had joined that organization for leave the organization, it actually gave me the opportunity to become and step into her role in the few years that I was at that organization. And I ended up becoming the head of learning and development for this organization that I joined. And I learned a lot from that experience. And it really gave me, again, that chance to step up and start to really think about who I wanted to be as a leader. And again, in that moment, really thinking about the team's well-being and their emotions and recognizing that that mattered and that we were all kind of humans going through this experience. I think for me, an important thing that I want to remind everyone is as you start to think about your careers and as you start to navigate your profession within the business world, organizations are made up of people. So we always have to remember that. It's a really key element that is critical. And so we're here to talk about mindful leadership. I want to, oh, it's not going to the next. We'll go to the next slide, but the next slide is actually our first polling question. So we had posted a couple polls. The first one was just asking everyone, what word comes to mind when you think about mindful leadership? So I know I have a couple of folks in the room. We had some online as well. So Sydney, what types of things did people enter into the poll around just the words that came to mind when they thought of mindful leadership?
So we had a lot of empathy, self-awareness, trust, focus, patience, all along those lines.
Yeah, a lot of really good words. Anyone in the room, any things that come to mind as well? Do you kind of agree with a lot of the things you heard there? Anything else you'd add when you think of mindful leadership? Yeah.
Maybe like collected. So like it goes along with the self-awareness, but collected.
Yeah. Yeah. Collected and calm, self-awareness. Yeah.
Maybe understanding.
Yeah. Understanding those around you. I think that's a really important one as well. If we go to the next, there we go. Thanks, Cindy. If we go to the next slide, you can kind of see, mindful leadership. Here's a couple key things that come to mind when we're talking about mindful leadership. The very first one, and I think we heard that in the room as well as in the online polls, being self-aware. And what that means, it's really about understanding yourself, understanding your personality, your preferences, understanding how you make decisions, all the things that you've been kind of programmed as through, nature, nurture, your life experiences, just all of those elements that really comprise you and make you who you are. That's one critical component of mindful leadership. The next one is really about learning how to separate yourself from those stressful events. So just like that story that I had shared at the start, stepping back in those moments of stress or in those difficult situations and starting to kind of realize that you have to, take that pause between what you're instantly feeling in that moment and then what's actually happening in the situation. And that is really hard to do. It's really hard to do because we are hardwired to react. The way that our brains are formed, we have a center of cells that are in the base of our brain called the amygdala. And what the amygdala does is it's a stress response system. It's very much tied to your emotions and your emotional response to situations. And when we are in an environment or a situation that is stressful or difficult, what that part of our brain does, and it used to really help us as early humans, but it kind of triggers that fight, flight, freeze response, right? So, can be very useful when we're out there, as a hunter or a gatherer, we need to react quickly in a stress kind of, dangerous situation. But Now in the world we're working in and in the business world, you still have that same response. And so you instantly are kind of jumping to react in a situation, but either by, I need to kind of fight in that situation, flight, freeze. So that's a huge aspect that's difficult because you almost kind of go through what we call the amygdala hijack. And it takes you away from your frontal lobe and those portions of your brain, prefrontal cortex, that are the executive center of your brain. That's where we're making high level decisions. It's where we're starting to really think through a problem. And so you need to find ways, and mindful leadership and being mindful can really help you to separate from that stressful moment and what your amygdala is trying to do to you, and start to re-engage by asking yourself questions or reflecting through breathing, finding ways to ground yourself, really start to kick in and re-engage that executive portion of your brain in the frontal lobe. The next aspect that I think is important to mention is around just having that humanistic, nurturing approach. And a lot of what that means is, I was actually a psychology major at Holy Cross. So, humanistic psychology, it's an element about just recognizing that we are all unique individuals, and that each human brings something different, really trying to understand the whole individual. That's another key element, which was, again, something I heard mentioned, when we kind of asked what we thought mindful leadership was. And then the final thing that I have up here was just a definition that came from the Association of Talent Development. And I thought this was a really good one because it had 4 elements that really add up to what mindful leadership is. It's comprised of just understanding and starting to master attention and focus. It's also about having intention. So really being thoughtful and deliberate about what you're trying to do in that particular situation. It's also about, we heard in the polls in the empathy, right? Emotional intelligence, and really starting to be emotionally aware in situations, how I'm feeling, how the other individuals are feeling around me. And then that final component, as I mentioned, being humanistic, having that holistic integrated perspective is also really important. So the second polling question that I had out there was around just because I think I want to get to this place of why are we talking about mindful leadership today? Why do you need it, right? So the second polling question is really about just thinking about the last year and a half or so that we've all been through, whether you were a working professional or you were a student. And I wanted everyone to just find a word that described how they felt during lockdown, whether you were going through that as in your academic or work life. How did you feel when things shifted fully remote and you had to either leave school or leave work? So, Sydney, what types of things did you hear in the polls for that second question?
So we have a couple: rattled, anxious, nervous, uncertainty, in the little asterisks, sigh,
Sigh.
disconnected, and all those.
Yeah. How about in the room? What types of things were you feeling? Yeah.
I was kind of feeling selfless.
Selfless. Yeah. How about others? Anything else?
A little bit isolated.
Isolated. Yeah.
Stressed.
100%. I mean, I think when I saw some of those items that people had posted, and even just from here, I think I'm like, yes to all of it, right? Check all the boxes. I felt all of those things as well. I distinctly remember my last day in the office. And for those of you that were working, I know a lot of our last days was March 13th, 2020, which feels like ages ago now. I remember packing up my office. I remember leaving the building and just all of that uncertainty, not knowing what was going to happen next, not knowing where we were going to go from here. Were things going to get better? Were they going to get worse? Just all of that feeling of just not knowing what was going to happen. Then getting the email a few weeks later saying the offices were going to be permanently closed. I'm sure for all of you that are students, finding out that the school was going to be closed, right? Just all of those, going back and remembering all those feelings and what we were all going through. I think for me, when I went through that, it really brought to mind, and I'm going to ask Sydney just to flip to the next slide. It brought to mind this visual. So hopefully for the folks online, you can see this, my folks in the room. I think, I love this visual, honestly. And to me, when you look at the one side of the screen that says how we think life works, again, going back to my story earlier, we like things to be planned, predictable, We like to feel like we have control over things that are happening, right, around us, especially as we are growing and we become adults. That gives you a lot of comfort, just having that sense that we have control over the situations that we're in. But on the other side of the screen, this is how it really works, folks. It's all about a life of chutes and ladders. And if you remember that game, Chutes and Ladders, it's, 1 minute you're on the way up, next minute you're down the chute, right? You never know when a chute's going to come. You never know when a ladder is going to come. And the reality is that's what life's really like. And we never really know what's going to happen. It's unpredictable, especially nowadays. I think what makes it even harder is, especially in the business world, and when you think about the market, it is nonlinear. So it's not even in many cases that you really know what could happen next. There's sometimes not logic to it. If you think about what happened with the pandemic, I think it adds up to a lot of those things. And that was a pretty significant chute that we all went through. And mindful leadership can really help you get through those situations. There's a lot of things that it can do for you in these difficult moments when perhaps you're going through a chute in life. And, here's a couple points just on why it's important to be mindful in today's environment, just recognizing what we all went through over the last year and a half. It really can help you, as I mentioned, kind of move away from autopilot and that partial attention that we're so used to giving in our day-to-day. We're all busy folks. I'm sure a great way to describe that sense of being on autopilot and partial attention is if you've ever been, getting in your car, driving somewhere, you reach your destination and you have no recollection of that drive, right? You're like, I don't even know how I got here, but I got here, right? It's because you were using that reptilian brain of yours, that we have that just kind of puts us on autopilot, right? Driving is very much a thing that once you learn how to do it, you can just kind of do without even thinking twice about it, right? Mindfulness can really help us get out of that place and start to become more focused, more present. It gives us that opportunity to be more authentic, agile, and start to react better in those moments when we're under stress. It also, and this is an important element for me, this last point here, it's a big one. It helps you to build compassion. It helps you in moments to really show vulnerability. It also helps build trust. And those are three elements that are really critical. So I'm going to say them again. Vulnerability, compassion, trust are all critical elements for what we call psychological safety. Psychological safety, there's a lot of research that's been done in that area. One of the thought leaders in the field, her name's Amy Edmondson. She's done a lot of research and work on psychological safety, and it is critical for teams. It is critical for teams to thrive. It helps them to find meaning in their work. It helps them to be creative and be productive. And then it also helps you to feel like you belong. It gives you that sense of unity, that feeling of being inclusive, all really important things for a team to thrive and really get the work done that they're here to do. And when I think about the pandemic and what that difficult moment in time did to all of us, for me, again, I started to think about my team. I started to think about all of the individuals on my team, like myself, who were working parents that were wondering what was going to happen to their kids when school closes. And now I have to figure out how to teach my kids while also do my job. I had team members who were caring for elderly parents, and they had that heavy responsibility of now being that primary, caretaker for those individuals that were really locked in their houses and weren't able to leave and even buy groceries because they were so afraid of being exposed to the virus. I had a lot of people that lived alone on my team who were experiencing isolation, which we heard earlier, right? And that feeling of just being alone. And so many of them were dependent on that office environment, or even, those of you that were dependent on that school environment for that socialization and just feeling connection to others. And now that was gone. So, for me, it started to become really important to get to that place where we could be united, be productive, find meaning in our work, to really think about the emotional and well-being of everyone on the team. It had to be more than just employees, employers here to do a job. We had to start thinking about the whole person, not just the aspect of that individual that was their worker self that they came in to do when we were in the office, with the pandemic and moving remote, it really forced us to kind of start thinking bigger and beyond that. And so what I did with my team were a couple of things. What we started to do were scheduling what we called coffee hours, where we would just get online just to be social. It was kind of the equivalent of like the water cooler or the coffee break kind of situation you would normally have in person or here meeting down in Cool Beans, right? Just being able to chat, connect, be social. And that was really important, especially for my folks that were alone, just to be able to have that time to just talk about like a book they really liked or a movie that they saw recently. And we also made time for, I became really vigilant about one-on-ones. So making sure I had consistent time with every single person on my team to just connect with them and check in with them and see how they were doing. And it was more about than just talking about the work. It was really about, how are you feeling right now? Where are you right now? It gave me an opportunity to just really, in a one-on-one way, check in on that emotional well-being and mental well-being of each person on the team and know where I might need to, go a little deeper with individuals to make sure they were getting the support they needed. And then we also, as part of our team meetings, we would have, regular team calls as well, about every other week. And we would play games, at the start of the call or the end of the call. In the middle was mostly business, but at the beginning and the end, we started to play games just to laugh, just to find joy again. That was another thing that was really important. And, all of those things, again, it was really just about being human again and finding that connection to one another as we were working. And for me as a leader, it's a lot about leading by example and being that person that takes that first step. Because in an organization, in a school, we have a lot of these types of services that are here for our mental and emotional health and well-being. But as a leader, you've got to take that step forward and be that person that is vulnerable, that talks to everyone and says, you know what, today I'm not feeling great. During the pandemic as well, just to kind of add it on for us, over the last year and a half, there was a lot of social unrest that we went through, right? So there were moments where I would meet with the team and I would just say, you know what, before we start, I just want to say I'm not feeling great today. And, with some of the stuff that's happening in the news, this is where I am and how that's affecting me. And the team so appreciated that because it gave them an opportunity to see me as a person and as a human beyond just like a boss and a leader of the group. And it also gave them a chance to say, you know what, I'm not feeling great either. We would have folks on the call that would just jump in and share that. And so that was a huge shift for us. And what was interesting about that was that there's a lot of research that supports that this makes a difference, that mindful leadership really matters. You can see that first item here that I have, again, that perception of physical and mental health truly can be significantly impacted by resilience, by mindfulness, by self-compassion. And the last one, of course, I had to put a KPMG, a data point out there, just being a KPMGer myself. But we have actually a women's leadership summit every year. And as part of that, we do a report on just the business climate, where women are as leaders and as executives. And so in this year's report, we surveyed 900 female executives. They are all within a position or two of the CEO and the C-suite. So, again, really senior women in their organizations. And 95%, when they reflected on their career and advancing in their career, said that resilience matters. And resilience, honestly, the way that you become a resilient individual is by practicing things like mindfulness, by practicing empathy, by practicing compassion. And so resilience really is a critical skill, especially when you think about navigating the business world. For those of you that are currently in the business world and trying to move within your organizations or move to new areas of business, for those of you that are students, resilience is a critical skill that we all need to really make sure that we're building in the future. It's what I would call a durable skill. Again, as a learning and talent development professional, we look at skills in different ways. And there are skills that are more perishable in today's world that, again, have a shorter shelf life. Some of those more technical skills, right? Because technology is moving at such a fast rate. But then there are skills which we call durable skills, which are kind of on the other end of the spectrum. These are lasting skills. These are skills that will carry you through organization to organization. They're transferable skills. that, again, you take with you from job to job. You heard again earlier this morning with our keynote speaker that, again, those skills around relationships, critical thinking, resilience, mindfulness, empathy and compassion, they're all durable skills that we have found in the workplace are really essential for thriving. And again, that last point that's on there, what was interesting in that KPMG leadership report, when they asked these female executives what they meant by resilience, the definition they went to works the things we would think, being adaptable, being agile. But then when they asked them, how do they show resilience? This is what they said: empathy, compassion, grace. So again, a lot of the things that I'm sharing, through the stories that I've been telling, these are the elements in the ways that we actually show that to one another. So we spent a lot of time just defining mindful leadership and talking about why it's important, but I wanted to get into just some simple practical tips on how to actually practice it. So there's a couple different things here. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm a practitioner. So for me, I wanted to give you some simple ways that you can apply mindful leadership. To me, it's not about going away on some magnificent retreat and becoming a guru in this, right? Like, we don't have time for that. It's really about finding simple, regular ways to practice a few minutes a day, different ways you can add to your daily schedule to start becoming more mindful, becoming more, and building those resilient skills that we need to all have. So here's a couple of things I wanted to share with everyone. And these are different things that I do, again, and just have learned from my experiences are very helpful and things that anyone can apply and incorporate into their day-to-day. So the first one is just looking for time to be still, to breathe, to reflect, just taking a few minutes. I like to try to do that in the mornings, just to do some reflection. It can also be really great to do at night for those of you that like to do journaling. Just write down a couple of thoughts of how the day went or what intentions you might want to have for the next day. A really simple thing that you can incorporate. Another great one is grounding exercises. So just taking 5 minutes to ground yourself before your next meeting or before your next class. It's a really simple thing. It's really about just kind of sitting and starting to be present and feel your breath, as well as start to feel and recognize your body. And what's interesting when it comes to mindfulness and practicing these skills, it often is really about the breath and the body. And the reason why is because those are the two things that are always present. They're always here and they're always in the current moment that you're in, your breath and your body. So grounding exercises can be really useful as well. And then just preparing and trying to be intentional about being present. So something that I started to do, especially when we went remote, was, again, I'm not in person and with you in a meeting anymore. So you can't see my visual cues. You can't see that I am there and with you. So I started to be really intentional about making sure there were no distractions, making sure my phone was away before I got on a call, making sure I took some notes and I was very clear on the things I wanted to cover, ask the individual. Just taking a few minutes to prepare before you have a meeting with someone can make a lot of difference and can help you to be more present and reduce some of the distractions that we're all experiencing. And then a couple other tips I have is just, again, blocking your calendar. So when you need to do some deep thinking or creative thinking, when you need to get work done, block some time, just take that time away, focus on what you need to get done as part of that work so that you're not getting all those distractions. Just try to unplug for a little bit and really be focused on the work you need to do. Really, again, a simple, easy thing. Another one, again, as I mentioned with my team members, just finding time to connect with people, to listen to them and listening to understand. What I mean there is it's not just about hearing them. It's really about listening for the emotion behind their words. What are they actually trying to tell you or convey? That's a really important practice, again, tying to emotional intelligence and empathy. And then, again, another important thing is finding time to just do some simple meditation, to really help reflection and boost your compassion as well as self-compassion. And self-compassion, that's another key term that I wanted to talk a little bit about and spend some time on. What self-compassion is it's a blend of 3 different elements. It involves self-kindness, it involves common humanity, And then it also involves mindfulness. And the reason why self-compassion is so important, and I'm actually going to ask you, Sydney, if we can jump to the next slide to just show another visual, is, your cup needs to be full before you're able to help others and fill others, right? So mindful leadership really does involve an individual being full to be able to be there for others. And you can't do that if you're not giving yourself some self-compassion. And I wanted to cover this one at this conference, especially because for women, we don't do a good job at this. We tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be it all, to do it all, especially as you start to move in your career and you're a working woman, if you decide to have a family and now you're, a working mother, working parent, it's something that we don't spend enough time on because we're so busy trying to take care of everyone else. But you can't be there for other people. You can't be present. You can't be in that moment for someone else and be able to help them and give them compassion if you're not doing that for yourself. So it's a really important one that I wanted to make sure I spent some time on. There's a lot of research out there on self-compassion. A major thought leader in that area, her name is Kristen Neff, if you want to read more materials on her and the work she's done. And what I wanted to actually do was take a few minutes because I thought, especially being a learning person, if I'm going to talk about a topic, I want you to experience it. It's important to me that you get a chance to feel what it's like to be mindful and practice some of these things that we're talking about. So what I want to do is take a few minutes to actually do a self-compassion grounded exercise to help you be a little more mindful. So first, I just want to see if everyone's comfortable with doing that. I know my folks in the room, are you guys okay if we do take a few minutes to do a quick exercise? Hopefully all my folks online, you're feeling the same way and you're comfortable to do an exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to just walk through a couple simple steps. And I just want you to just experience this exercise, be present with me as we walk through it. And then we'll talk a little bit, just to see how you felt and, how that experience was for you. So the first thing that I want you to do is just get comfortable. So for my folks online, you can do this at home as well. So I don't want you to just be, staring at the screen. Just try to go through this exercise as well, because I think you'll all hopefully enjoy it when we get to the end. So everyone just get comfortable in your seat. And I want you to close your eyes. And I just want you to take a couple breaths. Just take a couple deep breaths. Again, feel that breath and feel present in the moment. Try to start to remove some distractions. All right, great. Next thing I want you to do is I want you to direct your attention to someone that you love. Just think about someone that you love in your life. And just think about how that person is worthy of love and compassion. And I want you to send some love to that person. Send some love and energy to that person right now that you're thinking about. Next, what I want you to do is think about the people that you go to school with or you work with. And I want you to do the same thing. I want you to just realize and think about in your mind that those individuals are also worthy of love and dignity and compassion. And I want you to send some love to those people, the people that you work with, the people that you go to school with. Just take a few moments to send some love to them as well. And last, what I want you to do is think about yourself and to realize that you too are deserving of love, dignity, and compassion. And so I want you to take a moment and think about all that love that you were sending to your loved one, to the folks that you work with or go to school with. I want you to send some of that energy and love to yourself. Just take a moment and send some of that same love to yourself. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and return back to the room with us. And so my folks online, my folks in the room, how did that feel? Yeah.
I felt really relaxed through it all, but something I realized was it was really easier for me to give love to like my family and my school friends than myself. I kind of had trouble doing that.
Yeah. It was relaxing. I'm just going to repeat what she said. And then it was really easy to give love to your loved ones, to the folks that you go to school with, but it was hard to give that love to yourself. It was hard to kind of transition and do that, right? That's a great observation. Thank you. How about anyone else? How did you feel? Yeah.
I haven't done that very often, like that specific type of exercise. So it was interesting to see the transition, like Ariadne was saying, from others to yourself and try to like compensate everything that you're feeling for others to yourself.
Definitely. It's hard to kind of process that and do that shift, right? And start to send love to yourself because we don't do that. We honestly don't do that enough. Hopefully it was an experience where, again, it brought some relaxation to you. It brought you to that present moment. It made you feel good. That's what it's meant to do. And again, that's a simple exercise. That's a gift I'm giving to all of you that you can very easily do at any point in your day. Just take a few minutes and quickly walk through those steps. It can completely recharge and refresh you, and it can help fill your cup so that you're more present and more able to do that for other people. Again, from my perspective, mindful leadership and practicing these types of skills is not difficult. It's not meant to be something that's impossible or takes years to master. Very simple, practical steps that any one of us can apply to our day-to-day. So we're going to jump into some questions, but before we do, I wanted to give you 3 final reminders. And again, as a learning person and knowing about how we learn and brain science, we like to put things in 3s because our brains like to see patterns, and it just makes it easier for us to process and remember things. So I've given you 3. The first one is to lead with your head and with your heart. To me, at the end of the day, if I had to summarize mindful leadership, that's what it is. That's all it is. It's just trying to lead not just with your head at all times, but also leading with that head and that heart at all times, and trying to make sure you're bringing both of those to your day-to-day when you're working with others, when you're leading others. The second reminder is just creating space to be present, to be grounded, applying some of those simple exercises we talked about and the one we experienced to be able to just be in that present moment with other individuals. And then the third reminder is just, again, to make time for self-compassion and self-care. It is so important, especially as women, as students, as working professionals. We need to make more time to just, again, fill our cup and be present. And you can't do all the things that we talked about if you're not in that space that you feel whole and you're recognizing your whole self as well. So Sydney, I think what we can do, and the other thing I'll say before we jump to some of the questions is just that I put a lot of resources at the end of this deck that I put together. So a lot of the things that we talked about, there's some books there, there's some articles as well as websites that I encourage you all to explore. I also put in the exercise that we went through, so that way you have that and you can try that and I really encourage you, again, the best way to learn something new and a new skill is to practice it. So maybe try it with a friend or a family member, do it together with someone. You now will have all the instructions so that you could try some of these simple things that we talked about. So Sydney, we've got some good time here. So why don't we jump to a couple questions? And this is a quote from Brene Brown, who is, again, another really powerful thought leader in this space around vulnerability. She's done a lot of research on shame as well as practices that are mindful. And so this is a quote that I wanted to, end my presentation with, because to me, again, who you are, it's all about how you lead, and bringing self-awareness and self-love to that conversation. It truly is important. So what types of questions do we have?
So one question we have is what techniques do you use to promote psychological safety within your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talked about psychological safety earlier. As I mentioned, Amy Edmondson is a founder, kind of thought leader, coined a lot of that phrase and the practices around it. And as I mentioned, there's a couple key elements that are important to psychological safety. It's about first and foremost being vulnerable. So really being in that moment as a leader. And as I expressed earlier, just being clear to your team about how you're feeling in those moments when you're not feeling great or you are worried about something. Trying to be more transparent is really critical. It helps foster trust, and it really helps the team to be present and in the moment. So much of the research around psychological safety was actually done in, a lot of Amy Edmondson's work was done in the healthcare field. So a lot of the research was in those moments, like say in an operating room between a surgeon and the nurses. And oftentimes there's a very strong hierarchy in an environment like the healthcare space. And it was really about finding ways for, again, that surgeon and the nurses that and the assistants that are in the room to connect as humans and really realize that they're individuals, so that the nurses felt comfortable challenging the surgeon or questioning if the surgeon had done everything that was on the checklist to make sure they didn't leave any remnants of any sort of surgical equipment in the patient. Believe it or not, that is something that does happen. And sometimes a nurse may see something and they feel kind of scared or afraid to bring it up because they don't want to get reprimanded. They don't want to jeopardize their future or their job. And so oftentimes we don't feel safe. We don't feel psychologically safe to speak up and to share what we're feeling. So a lot of the important skills there that you need to be able to practice psychological safety are around just, again, creating that environment and that safe space for people to make them feel like it's okay to say what they need to say and that there aren't going to be any repercussions as a result. Being able to create that type of setting and environment can really change the nature of your team, because then people do start to feel more comfortable to share new ideas or throw things out there that maybe sound a little crazy, but could end up being that really next great big thing that your team does. So those are a couple different things that are important around psychological safety.
Awesome. And then we have one that asks, when being mindful leader, how do you balance being a leader versus being a colleague and a friend?
Yeah. So that balance between being a mindful leader, being a colleague, and being a friend can be really challenging. I will share a lot of my leadership experiences, like the story that I started with, was me being part of a team and then being moved up and promoted within that team to become the leader. So I went from being the coworker and the colleague of individuals to now being their boss. And that's actually happened to me a couple of times in my career. And what's important to me between those is I feel like you can be all of those things with someone, because again, you're bringing your whole self to a situation and to work. But what's really important is to have boundaries and make sure that within those conversations that, there are times where we have to have conversations where I am your boss. And, during times like performance reviews or performance related or development related discussions, that's what I'm here for. I'm wearing that hat as your boss. But I also, in my one-on-ones with folks and in my team conversations, I always try to, again, bring my whole self and be a friend, be a colleague as well. It honestly makes for such a better work environment. It's interesting. I read an article recently by Harvard Business Review that was talking about the difference between individuals working in an organization and thinking themselves as a family versus fostering a healthy environment where people feel connected and still feel like they have a great environment that they're working in. And interestingly, that family type of environment can end up becoming really toxic, because if you think about it, at the end of the day, what's very hard is, again, you need to have some sense of boundaries, because if there are changes in an organization, if it impacts a particular employee, how does that feel, right? If someone needs to be exited from an organization, you don't do that to your family, right? So giving them that sense of family can be really hard to manage. It's, I think, more important and healthier as a leader to foster an environment where still people feel connected, they feel they belong. But again, at the end of the day, we're employees, we work for an employer. Having those boundaries and that healthy sense of, what this is versus what it isn't is really critical. What other questions?
Yeah. So another one is, how has your Jesuit liberal arts degree helped you navigate your career?
Yeah, so this is a great one. And when we talked about, I think when we were doing some of our prep for this session. So when I thought about what my Jesuit arts degree here at Holy Cross did for me, and I think I honestly, again, I related a lot to what we heard from our keynote this morning. It really brought that holistic point of view to handling work, thinking about work. And I'll be honest, I did not realize that when I was going through Holy Cross. Like as a student, I was just kind of going through the motions and doing all the things that a student does. But when I look back and I actually reflect on that, 20 years ago when I graduated, I actually realized that Holy Cross really was so profound in my career and where I ended up, because when I was at Holy Cross, it gave me the opportunity to think deeply about subjects. So think about psychology and learn about all the different aspects of psychology, to also volunteer. So I was part of the Students for Urban Development, and I had the opportunity to volunteer at schools, public schools in Worcester, to do arts-based after-school programs with young students. And I also had, while I was in Holy Cross, helped organize a group that was focused around multicultural peer education. So, again, all the aspects of who I was, Holy Cross really gave me an opportunity to do that. I even played music at the church choir for a while. So again, all these elements. And what was interesting is as I've developed as a professional, I've realized, just like we heard earlier, bringing all of those elements to my life and to my work is really what brings those feelings of just contentment and success. I now, in addition to the work that I do, I joined a board for a nonprofit organization in New York. The organization's called LEAP. And interestingly, they actually are providing arts-based programs to New York City students. So it's very similar to what I did here at Holy Cross. And now I'm on a board for an organization that does that. And for me, in my career and where I am, I started to realize that the reasons why I decided to join a board over the last year was I wanted to do more than just my work. I wanted to be able to contribute. I wanted to give back. And so much of that is what I learned at Holy Cross and being a man and a woman for and with others. I also feel like it really has helped my leadership style and the way that I address challenges and situations that I encounter as a leader on a day-to-day basis. It helps me kind of look at problems from different angles and as a whole versus a much more kind of siloed approach. I think so much of why I lead the way I do is because of what I learned at Holy Cross as well, of just, again, thinking about the fact that we are organizations made up of people and bringing that humanness to my leadership style. There's a lot of other related leadership styles that are worth mentioning that, again, tied to a lot of what I learned at Holy Cross and what we practice. So in addition to mindful leadership, you've probably heard of things like servant leadership, or humble leadership, or empathetic leadership, compassionate leadership. They're all in the same family. And again, it's all about just bringing humanness to the business world and to our leadership style. And again, so much of that for me came from Holy Cross and the things that I learned.
That's great. That's awesome. And then we have one from the audience. It says, mindful leadership sounds like a fantastic way to practice being a leader. What do you suggest someone should do if they have a leader boss who does not practice mindful leadership? Is there a way that you can demonstrate how to be a mindful leader to someone who is your boss?
Yeah, so this whole question of what do I do when my boss is not a mindful leader? How do I address that situation? I think it's a good question, and it's one that comes up a lot. I've done some thinking on this, and I've definitely been in situations where, as an employee, I did have a boss that maybe wasn't as mindful, wasn't as empathetic. The first thing that I want to say around a situation like that, and even if it's not a boss or it's like someone that's in your life that you're dealing with that's maybe not as mindful, not as compassionate or empathetic as you would like, the most important thing to keep in mind is you can't change that person, right? We don't have the ability to change the behavior of other people. So that's, I think, the most important thing you have to acknowledge up front. The only thing you can change is yourself. So the only thing that you have control over in a situation that's difficult with another person, an interpersonal issue, is you have that power to change yourself or change your behavior and your reaction to situations. So the things that I would recommend would be, one, I mentioned earlier, boundaries. Boundaries are very important. So really starting to create boundaries between you and that individual where, again, if you have a boss, I definitely have had and have heard of situations where say maybe your boss is calling you at all hours or wanting to, you've kind of powered off, turned off your computer at 5:30 and you're still getting messages or things from, your boss or an individual that you work with. What I've done in situations like that, you just can respond to that person and say, you know what, I'm offline. I will get to this tomorrow, first thing tomorrow morning when I'm back in the office. This is, unless it's like a life or death situation, which I will say for the most case, when we're in the business world, you're not going to encounter a lot of those unless you work in healthcare. So for most cases, I think we could say, hey, you know what, I'm offline right now. Is it okay? I'm going to get to this first thing tomorrow. And that's like a really easy way to set some boundaries, right? Simple things like that, and just kind of setting some expectations of, again, when you're busy, when you need to create some time and space for yourself and creating some boundaries in that relationship with you and the other individual, that's a really simple thing to do. I think it's also, I'd say lead by example. So just continue to practice these behaviors. I've definitely been in situations where, again, the boss maybe was difficult, wasn't as empathetic and compassionate, and we're in team meetings and maybe someone's getting berated or a difficult situation's going on. After that meeting, go check in with that team member maybe that, heard it from the boss and see how they're feeling, see how they're doing. Again, you can practice these things, even though maybe your environment may not be as conducive because of this boss. I know another option is to talk to the individual. I would say be careful in that conversation, because if you truly are dealing with someone that isn't mindful, isn't empathetic, they may not be willing to hear you. So you're only going to be able to get so far in that conversation. So I would say that that's not one I would recommend as often in situations, unless you really feel equipped with the skills to be able to have the right conversation with that person, really focus on facts and what you're seeing and hearing in that situation. It may help, but I would say in most cases, it probably won't. So it's more so the things that you can do for yourself. And then there might be situations where you feel like you might need to move to a new role or to a new organization just because you need that change in environment, depending on how much this is affecting you.
Oh, that's great. And then another one asks, how can one work to become more of a mindful leader?
Yeah, so how to become more mindful? I think I would say, again, a lot of the simple practices that I shared, I don't think overnight anyone's expected to, again, become this big guru in this space. So I would, again, small little things. If you think about anything new that you're trying to learn and do, it's sometimes just simple, very consistent, disciplined ways of incorporating it into your work can make a huge difference. So just, again, the 5 minutes every morning, if or if you are a person that likes to exercise, maybe taking a few minutes just to walk or just lie down and breathe after your workout when you're stretching. Simple things that you can do to just get more connected with your breath and your body, I think are great ways to practice it. I think also, as I mentioned, that element around being there for others. So just checking in with people more often, spending more time to get to know the individuals around you, see how they're feeling. That can make a world of difference as well. So I would say, again, just some simple little practices that you can incorporate. Those are the ways that you can actually form a habit and form a formal practice as part of, who you are as a leader and as an individual. I'm curious if there's any questions in the room or if anyone has any questions, beyond what we've talked about. Yeah.
Oh, what do you do in your personal and business life when like those shoots come?
What do I do in my business life when the shoots come?
Yeah.
I wish I could say that I take those shoots in life with grace and poise in all and every aspect when they come my way, but I'm not going to say that. I mean, that's not real. So again, in practicing mindfulness and being vulnerable and transparent, I think, I'm human. So like everyone, I think there are these moments where you might feel, those instant reactions, right? Those stress responses of feeling hurt or feeling sad or feeling scared or feeling angry. I think what for me has happened over my career, and as I've started to practice this more, it's the ability to be able to pivot from that sooner. So when I was younger, I would definitely be more emotional. I've even had moments early in my career where something happened and I would feel like I'm like crying at work, and I'm like, oh great, I'm the emotional woman crying at work, right? But as I've grown and matured in my career and just learned to just be more aware of my emotions and aware of my feelings, I'm able to kind of pivot more quickly and move from, okay, this is something I'm feeling right now, but what's more important is what I'm going to do about it. how am I going to respond from here, right? Because our feelings are our feelings. Those are always going to be there. They're always going to be part of who you are. And I think for me, what's really important and why I care so much about mindful leadership is it allows us to be our whole selves and be that emotional person that we are, while also being someone that is a bit more controlled in situations. You're allowed to do both. You don't have to do one or the other. I think a lot of times we think I either have to be stoic or I have to be the super emotional person, but you actually can be both. You can bring both and have controlled responses to situations while also feeling them. So I think for me, when those moments happen, it's really about, again, when I think back to the pandemic and how I felt and my family life as well as my work life, it was really about just, again, stepping back from the emotions that I was feeling and really start to think through that situation. Again, get that frontal lobe working again and the executive part of my brain where I could start thinking through. A lot of times what helps in those moments is to ask yourself questions. Questions can really get you reprogrammed again and get you off that autopilot or those quick stress like responses. So that's another thing, just what do I want right now? What do I want for myself? What do I want for the other person? Just some simple questions in those moments can be really helpful to start to pivot you into thinking through a situation more critically and with less, of that stress and emotional response. Any other questions? All right, great. Anything else that you're seeing, Sydney, that is worth responding? I know we didn't have the folks online be able to ask things on audio, but just want to see if there's anything else.
Yeah, no, I know they could post something here, but there's, I guess one more. It says, how do you foster an inclusive and diverse working environment?
Sure. So, this has become a really big topic over the last year. I think with, again, the year that was 2020 that we all went through, there was a lot of social unjust that we saw unfold before our eyes. I mean, these are things that have happened for a long time, but I think that the national attention around it was more than ever. And because of that, a lot of organizations had felt they had to respond, right? We had a lot of strong responses in the working world. And these concepts of diversity and inclusion have been around for a long time, but I think where we started to shift was thinking about diversity, inclusion, equity, starting to look at these all as a whole and not just thinking about practices we should be doing to make sure we're bringing more diverse individuals into the workforce, but really thinking about this sense of belonging, this sense of unity. What does that mean? And so for me, what I do, and I'll be honest, I mean, I think for me, it was a bit more natural to go in that direction, probably as a person of color myself. I think it's really, what do I want in an environment? What's the type of environment as a leader that I want to foster, where I've been in a lot of situations where I haven't felt like I belonged. I am physically, I clearly am different from a lot of other folks. And so for me as a leader, when I started to lead teams, I wanted to make sure that I fostered a space where everyone felt like they were welcome, not just, if they looked different or they thought, but also if they thought different or had different ideas. I wanted everyone to feel like, because there's also that whole benefit of having, cognitive diversity. So people who think and see the world differently from others, it can really help to break down things like groupthink. And so for me, it was really about just, again, fostering the right safe space for everyone. So again, those elements around psychological safety that I mentioned, just making sure that I was vulnerable and transparent about what who I am and what I'm looking for, giving everyone that space to be themselves. I think a lot of it is that simple. It's just giving them room and stepping back so that they can bring their whole self into a situation. And we do a lot of things like just celebrating different moments for folks on the team, or even hardships, just allowing people to bring that whole self and what they're going through, I think is really important. And I think also just having conversations about it is really important, because saying that diversity and inclusion are important to your organization or to your team is one thing, but actually living that and being willing to engage in difficult conversations around these topics is really critical. So I think that I would also encourage folks to just, you don't have to do it right in a sense, like there's no perfect way to have those difficult types of conversations. For anyone that is considers themselves, an individual that is on the outside of, what the majority is. I think for them, it's more about just having someone that's willing to have the conversation and come to them. So I think for me, it's really about just creating that space so that we can engage in conversations and kind of sometimes stumble our way through, and that's okay, because you know what, we're coming to those conversations with the right intention. So I think those would be some of the things that I would recommend.
Awesome. That's all I think we have time for.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jackie. I just shared the screen with Zoom and then you guys with the resources. This was the exercise that
Yep.
Jackie had walked us through. And then these are some books and articles and suggestions for reading. These slides will also be posted on Whoville later, so we want to go back and refer to them. But thank you so much.
All right,
Jackie.
thanks so much, Sydney. Thanks so much for everyone here in the room and everyone online as well. It was a pleasure to be here and talk to you about this really important topic. And I wish you all the best with your mindful leadership practices. Hopefully you'll take one of the things we talked about today and try to apply it in your day-to-day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. It's great to get to talk to you. You guys had some really great comments and